Hey, what's up everybody? I'd like to welcome you to another audio programmer tutorial. And today we're going to expand on the FM synth that we created in our last tutorial to help explain some more fundamental concepts of Metasounds in Unreal Engine. The theme of this tutorial is triggers and events. In the last tutorial, I showed you how to create a simple FM synth, but we had no way to control how long the sound played, so we're going to control that sound now with an ADSR envelope and use trigger events to control how and when the synth starts and stops playing. So today we'll be walking through the basics of the on-play input event, ADSR envelopes, triggers, trigger delays, trigger toggles, and trigger repeats. Here's a demonstration of what we're going to be making today. As always, be sure to join our audio programmer community on Discord. It's a great way to connect with other audio programmers of all experience levels and help learn from each other. You can join us at theaudioprogrammer.com/community. And without further delay, let's get started. Here we are with our FM synthesizer that we created in our last tutorial. Now the first thing that I'm going to do is add a little bit of volume control because I know that this sound can be a little bit loud, especially if you're wearing headphones. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull out this output a little bit, and we're going to create a multiply node that we talked about in our last tutorial. And we're going to use multiply audio. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a little bit of volume control here so we don't have such a loud volume. Now what we need is a multiplier that we can multiply our audio signal times. And what we can do is use a conversion from float to audio. So essentially that's going to take a floating point number and it's going to convert it to an audio rate signal so that I can actually control the volume. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a parameter from this float value so that I can just control it easily with a dial. And so now we have this volume that I can control between 0 and 1. So if I just play the sound quickly. So I'm going to keep it right about here at 0.16 just so it doesn't rock your eardrums whenever I'm playing this sound and experimenting around. Cool. So now what we want to do is we want to get some control over this sound. So currently I can start or stop the sound by pressing the space bar, and that allows me to audition the sound. But what if I wanted to attach this to an event of, let's say we're making a game and we want to have an event where the player presses a button and it initiates this sound of the FM synthesizer. The way that we would need to do that is using this on-play node. So on-play is essentially an event that allows us to control when we want this Metasound to start or stop. So the way that we would do this is that we use this on play event, and now we want to control how this sound is going to start and stop. So currently we just have kind of one default mode, which is that when I hit the space bar, the sound is playing. There's no way to control when it starts or when it stops. So what I want to do is I'm going to create a envelope. So an envelope is a way that we can describe how we want this sound to play. Now, if you know synthesizers, you probably know about ADSR envelopes, which are a way that we can describe how quickly we want the sound to come in, how long we want it to sustain, and how how slowly or how quickly we want the sound to end when we're in the release stage. So if you think of a keyboard, when you press the key down, that is the attack, that initiates the event, and when you release the key, that initiates the release of the envelope. So there is an ADSR envelope node, and the way that we would do this is just by calling up ADSR envelope. And as you can see, there are two different types. There's one that is an audio rate envelope and one that is a floating point number envelope. And we want the audio rate one. So I'm going to go ahead and press that. And so now what we have is we have this a whole bunch of parameters in here. So we have the trigger attack. So if we think of, once again, the event being us pressing down on a keyboard key, attack would be when we press down, and release, a trigger release would happen when we let up on the keyboard key. And then we can control the attack, decay, sustain, and release times by making parameters out of these. So what I could do is I'm going to take the on-play event. So think of this as an event that's coming from the outside world or from your game. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to route the on-play event into the trigger attack. So that just means that when I start the Metasound, that right away it's going to trigger the attack of this ADSR envelope. Right? Now, what I want to do is I'm going to now use this envelope. So the envelope is going to be essentially a multiplier, just like how we did for this gain node that I just created, that's going to go between 0 and 1, and that's going to control how the sound is going to behave. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these and I'm going to move these out a little bit. So we actually have two volume controls here. One that is just controlling our overall volume to make sure that I don't make the sound too loud, and another one that's going to actually control the behavior of the sound itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect the oscillator from this multiplier node just by doing that. And now what I can do is I can create another multiply node, and I want to multiply two audio signals. I'm going to take the output of this multiplier, I'm going to put it into the input of our main volume control, and I'm going to take the audio out of the square oscillator, I'm going to put that in one side, and I'm going to take the out envelope from the ADSR that we just created, and I'm going to put it into the other side. And now what you're going to see is that the sound is not going to sound different at all. So notice that there's still no stop to the sound. The sound is just continuously playing. And the reason for that is because we don't have a trigger release yet. So we haven't signaled that we want this envelope to let up. So think of yourself just pressing a key down and just leaving it down. So we need to have some type of way to tell our envelope that we want to release. So this is where trigger nodes come in. So what we can do is we can use a trigger to signal when we want an event to start or when we want an event to stop. So the way that we could do this, the first one is just by bringing up a trigger, and as you can see, there are loads of different types of triggers. The one that we want is just the most basic one, which is a trigger toggle. So here we have a trigger toggle, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect the on play event from the ADSR envelope, and now I'm going to connect it into the trigger toggle, and then I'm going to connect the output into the attack. Once again, you're not going to hear any difference. What you do notice is that the on play has now triggered the trigger toggle. That in turn triggers the ADSR envelope. And now we need another way that we can trigger this release. So there are several different ways that you can do these types of things. So this is where we're going to introduce the trigger delay. So trigger delay means that it's going to get a trigger signal, but before it outputs a trigger to the next node, it's going to wait for a given period of time. So what I can do is I can bring up a trigger delay node. And now you see that we have this trigger delay node and that it has a default delay time of 1 second. So what I can do is I can now take the input or the output of on play, route it into the input of the trigger delay, route the output of that into trigger release. And what's nice is that you have these animations that show when the signal is actually flowing to the next node. So what you're going to see is that on play is going to simultaneously load into the trigger toggle and into the trigger delay, and that what we're going to do is that it's going to wait for 1 second, and then it's going to output a trigger, the release of the trigger. So this is an automated way of us saying, okay, I want the keyboard key to be pressed down for 1 second and then released, and this is what we get. So as you can see, I'm going to do that again. So there's a delay time between when this trigger delay receives the on play event and when it actually outputs this. Right? And what we can do is we can actually control this time by making it a parameter. So what I can do is I can click down with the mouse, drag out, promote to graph input, which makes it a controllable parameter. And now I can make this really short if I want to. So let's say we want to make it 0.176 seconds. So this will be a very short sound, right? And another thing that we can do is I can just take these and let's just move these up to make some more room. And now I can add some further control by taking the attack, decay, sustain, and release times and making all of those parameters as well. So I'm just going to take this, move this down a little bit, just so try to make a little bit more room for everything. So we got attack, decay, sustain, and release. Just going to take this, move this down a little bit further. And remember that we could actually click on these parameters and we can make sure that these are sensible numbers. So normally for an ADSR envelope, attack and release can have varying numbers of what the max of those are. Decay and sustain tend to be between 0 and 1. So if we want the maximum attack time to be 1 second, then that's fine. I could make this 2 second max attack time. And then if I wanted to go to release, the release is currently set to a max of 1 second. And let's say that I wanted to make this a max of 3 seconds. So now what we have is that if we play this sound, then it'll have a release time of 1 second. Right? But if I wanted that to be a short release, then I could do this and I could bring this down. So it's a more instant type of stop. Right? Or I can make it long, where it's a 3 second, and then I could give it an attack time where it takes 1 second to attack. And then what I want to do is I want to change the delay time of how long it is before the trigger delay changes releases the trigger from the ADSR envelope. And now you're going to get a sound that's going to come in more gradually. Right? So that's how you can use trigger toggle, trigger delay, and the ADSR envelope to start to get some control over the shape of the sound. So one note that I will say is that at the moment, this trigger toggle actually isn't doing very much because it's just going from the on play, which actually is a trigger in itself, through the trigger toggle to the trigger attack. But what if we did want to do something with this? What if we wanted to make it put out a bunch of triggers rather than just one trigger for one note? So currently we just have where we can only play one note at a time. But what if we wanted this to trigger more than one note? So how would we do that? So what we could do is we could change this trigger toggle to a trigger repeat. And the way that we do that is that I'm going to search for trigger repeat, and now we bring up this node. So this is very similar to what we have with the trigger toggle, except what this does is it repeats. And then what we can do is we can change the period, which is how quickly we want this repeat to happen. So currently it's set at 0.2 seconds. Okay. Now, what we would want to also do is we want to make sure that the repeat actually goes into the trigger delay, because as quickly as we have the triggers happening, we want subsequent trigger releases happening a certain period of time after each trigger attack. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to take out the trigger delay that's being input from on play, and I'm going to take on play, route it into the start of the trigger repeat, take the repeat out, and I'm going to route it into the trigger attack. And then I'm going to take the repeat out and also route it into the trigger delay. Okay, because every time we press the button down, so to speak, on or activate the ADSR, after a certain period of time, we want to release the envelope as well. So now what I want to do is I want to take this the period of how often this trigger repeats, and I can make that a parameter. So I'm going to pull that out and select promote to graph input. Currently it's at 0.2 seconds. And so let's hear how that sounds. Right? So we can increase how quickly we want that to happen. And now we can use all of these different parameters to start shaping our sound in different ways. So if I want this to be a short kind of poppy sound, then I can take the sustain, drop it all the way down. I can take the release. I can make this short as well, and then drop the decay time down. And now we get something like this. Now we can use other parameters such as our frequency and the FM input to control and shape how the sound is. Right? Pretty cool, right? So another thing that we can do, so this is just something that you don't necessarily need to do. This is something that I like to do, is that let's say that we make the how often this trigger repeats really long. So let's say that we make it something like 5 seconds, right? What we'll notice is that even when this ADSR envelope is not being activated, what's happening is that the waves of each one of these oscillators is still happening. So see how there's no sound playing, but that you still see these being activated? So this is just me. I actually want to reset those oscillators when they're not actively being played. So the way that I could do this is I can actually use another trigger toggle on the other side of this. And what I can say is that on attack triggered, so when the ADSR is active, I want this to trigger on, right? And what I could do is I could send this to the oscillators if the oscillators are actually enabled or not, right? So this is just a design choice that I'm making. It's something just to show you some of the things that you can do with Metasounds. And then what I want to do is that if the ADSR envelope is not active, then I can do an on done signal. So when the envelope is finished, then it turns and disables the oscillators. Okay, so just once again something very small that can show you what some of the capabilities of Metasounds are. So here we go again. So you're going to see this, but now you're going to see that those oscillators aren't generating sound and hogging up resources. Right? So now you see it start and it stops, right? And there you go. So this is a way that you can get started and how you can use triggers, trigger delay, trigger repeats to start controlling the sound. So I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to give it a like and subscribe. And in the next tutorial, we'll talk about some other ways that we can do things like control the notes that are actually being played out of the synthesizer to give us even more control and more interesting interactions with this Metasound. So until then, I will see you next time.